My girlfriend suggested an open relationship just for fun, but later she asked for marriage and a family. I saw I no longer viewed her as my wife and walked away. My world ended the night Evelyn asked for an open relationship. I thought saying yes would save us, but it was the moment I signed our death certificate, too afraid to lose the woman I loved. Looking back, I can pinpoint that exact evening everything started falling apart. At the time, though, I truly believed I was being mature, understanding, even evolved. Evelyn and I had been together for 3 years, sharing a small apartment in downtown Denver, splitting bills, cooking dinners, even talking about getting a dog one day. We had that comfortable rhythm couples fall into, where you know each other's coffee order, finish each other's sentences. I genuinely believed we were building something permanent: marriage, kids, growing old together. She was smart, funny, ambitious, and I loved her in that deep, settled way where you stop questioning if this is the right person and just start planning the future. Then, one evening in late spring, she came home from drinks with her friend Chloe, and I immediately sensed a shift. She had this nervous energy, this almost rehearsed excitement. We were on our worn couch, the one we'd bought together at a thrift store, and she turned to me with this carefully casual expression. She started talking about honesty, about growth, about how relationships evolve. My stomach dropped. I knew whatever was coming wasn't good. Then she said it. "I think we should open our relationship." It wasn't a question, or even a discussion, but an idea she'd already fully formed. She explained it like a business proposal, how monogamy was a social construct, how we could be honest about our needs, how this would actually make us stronger. She even mentioned Chloe and her boyfriend had been doing it for months and were happier than ever. I just stared, trying to process. My first instinct screamed, no, absolutely not. This wasn't what I wanted. But then she looked at me with those eyes I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, and I saw something beyond the excitement, a warning. It felt like she was saying this wasn't really a request. If I said no, she might leave anyway. So, instead of being honest about my feelings, I asked for time to think. She nodded, gave me space. But over the next few days, she kept bringing it up gently, sharing articles about ethical non-monogamy, telling me stories about couples who made it work. There were no ultimatums, no threats, just this constant, soft pressure, wearing down my resistance like water on stone. I felt sick, barely ate, worked on autopilot. My coworkers probably thought I had the flu. At night, I'd lie awake beside her, feeling the distance between us, even in the same bed. I kept thinking about our years invested, our plans, and I couldn't bear losing her. I convinced myself maybe this could work, maybe I was closed-minded, maybe love meant flexibility. 1 week later, I told her yes. The relief on her face should have told me everything, but I ignored it. We sat down, created rules. And I clung to those rules like a life raft. No one from work, boundaries get blurred there. Protection, always, no exceptions. Never in our apartment, that was our sacred space. Complete transparency about who and when. Either of us could call it off any time, no questions asked. She agreed to everything so easily. I felt like maybe we could navigate this. Maybe we really were evolved enough. The first time she went out to meet someone, I thought I might throw up. It was a Friday evening. She dressed carefully, not too sexy, but definitely an effort. She kissed me goodbye like she was heading to the gym, casual, light, promising to be back by 10. "It's just coffee," she said with a smile. I sat in our apartment, the silence deafening. I tried TV, couldn't focus. Tried reading, words blurred. I checked my phone constantly, watching minutes crawl. She texted once around 7, "Everything's fine." I stared at that message for 10 minutes, trying to decode fine. I told myself this was a phase, she'd realize what we had was enough, things would normalize. I poured a drink, then another, trying to quiet the screaming voice inside me that this was all wrong. When she came home, she was glowing. She talked about Noah, how interesting he was, how easily the conversation flowed. I smiled, nodded, asked the right questions, playing the supportive partner. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. I realized I'd agreed to this not to explore or grow, but out of sheer terror of losing her. And that fear, that willingness to compromise my own boundaries just to keep her, that was the crack in our foundation. Over the next weeks, she went out a few more times, always with notice, always following the rules, always coming home to me. And I tried. I really tried to be okay with it. I even went on one date myself, met a woman at a bar, had a pleasant conversation, and felt absolutely nothing. It was mechanical, empty. I was going through motions I didn't want. When I got home, Evelyn asked how it went, and I saw the relief on her face when I said just okay. That should have told me something, too. But I wasn't ready to see it yet. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have predicted, was that the rules we'd so carefully constructed were only going to apply to one of us. I was still playing the game honestly, still believing in the framework. But Evelyn had already decided which rules mattered and which were just suggestions. By the time I figured that out, I'd already lost something I could never get back. I kept telling myself it was just a phase. I didn't know yet that this was the beginning of the end. The scariest thing about an open relationship isn't jealousy. It's the moment you realize the rules only exist for you. For the first 2 months, I told myself we were navigating this together, being honest and respectful. But small things started changing. Tiny shifts. Evelyn became distant in ways that had nothing to do with her seeing other people. We'd watch a movie, and she'd be physically there, but mentally somewhere else, her fingers moving across her phone with a small, unfamiliar smile. Touches became less frequent, eye contact shorter, conversations more surface level. It was like living with a roommate who used to be my girlfriend. She kept seeing Noah, the guy from that first coffee date. She'd mention him casually, like he was just another friend. Noah recommended this restaurant, or Noah told me about this hiking trail. I'd just nod along, swallowing the bitter taste. According to our rules, this was fine. Allowed. Healthy communication. But it didn't feel healthy. It felt like I was slowly being replaced in my own relationship. I tried a few more dates myself, thinking maybe I just needed to embrace this lifestyle more fully. I met people, had conversations, went through the motions, but I always came home feeling emptier. Our apartment, once a sanctuary, started feeling like a hotel, a place where 2 people slept in the same bed but didn't connect. I'd lie awake next to her, feeling her physical warmth, but the emotional coldness between us. I'd wonder how we'd gotten here so fast. Then, around month 3, I started noticing things that made my stomach turn. Her phone, which used to sit casually on the coffee table, was always face down. She'd get texts and immediately flip it over, or take calls in the other room, her voice low and private. When I asked who it was, she'd give vague answers, just a friend or work stuff, with a tone that discouraged follow-up. One evening, about 4 months in, I asked her directly about transparency, reminding her it was a core agreement. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen, somewhere between annoyed and cornered. "You don't actually want to know all the details," she said, almost accusatory, as if I were breaking our agreement by asking. That's when I knew something had fundamentally shifted. The rules we'd created weren't guidelines for both of us anymore. They were restrictions that only applied to me. I was still following everything to the letter, communicating, being honest. But she decided some rules were more like suggestions, and transparency was optional when it became inconvenient. I started paying more attention, not because I wanted to be suspicious, but because I couldn't ignore the obvious. She'd mention drinks with colleagues after work, but come home with that same glowing energy she had after seeing Noah. She'd talk about team projects and late meetings, but her stories had holes, details that didn't quite line up. Then one evening, she casually mentioned a name I hadn't heard before, Ryan, a guy from her office, someone on her team. She described him as funny, smart, easy to talk to. My blood went cold. Our very first rule, the one we'd both agreed was non-negotiable, was no one from work. Work was supposed to be the boundary, the safe zone. But here she was, mentioning this Ryan guy with the same tone she used for Noah, like it was nothing, like our rules were just suggestions she could ignore when someone interesting came along. I didn't confront her right away. Part of me didn't want to confirm what I was already suspecting. But I couldn't let it go either. Over the next 2 weeks, I started noticing patterns. She'd mention working late, but her car would be gone for hours longer than any meeting. She'd come home smelling different, wearing cologne I didn't recognize. She'd shower immediately, saying she needed to wash off the stress, but it felt like she was washing off evidence. Then came a Saturday afternoon that changed everything. We were supposed to have lunch, one of our standing weekend traditions we'd tried to maintain. She got a call, stepped into the bedroom, and I heard her voice through the door, low, intimate, in a way she hadn't spoken to me in months. When she came out, she said it was Noah, having a crisis, needing to talk. She'd be back in a couple of hours. But something in the way she said it, the way she avoided my eyes, told me it wasn't Noah. I sat in that apartment after she left, and for the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of what was happening. This wasn't an open relationship. This was her wanting permission to do whatever she wanted while I sat home, following rules she'd abandoned. This was her having her cake and eating it too, keeping me as the stable home base while she explored without consequences. I'd been so afraid of losing her that I'd agreed to lose myself instead. When she came home that evening, I was waiting on the couch. I didn't yell, didn't accuse. I just asked, "Are you seeing Ryan?" She froze. I watched 5 different emotions cross her face in 3 seconds. Then she sat down and tried to explain, to justify, to make it sound less bad than it was. She admitted they'd gotten close, grabbed drinks a few times, that it was just friendly at first. But the careful way she chose her words told me there was more. I pressed harder, asking directly if they'd crossed any lines. She hesitated, then admitted they'd kissed once. Just once, she insisted, and she'd felt terrible about it immediately. She swore that was all, nothing else had happened, she'd been planning to tell me. The lies were so smooth, so practiced, I almost believed her. Almost. I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 3 years, and I didn't recognize her anymore. Or maybe I finally recognized who she really was. "If this is making us worse people," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "then we need to stop all of it." She nodded quickly, tears forming, and promised we would. She said she'd cut things off with Ryan completely, recommit to us, that we could fix this. She reached for my hand. I let her take it, even though it felt wrong. We agreed to close the relationship, to go back to just us, to try and rebuild. That night, lying in bed next to her, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe one conversation could fix months of lying and boundary crossing. But something in my gut told me the truth was worse than what she'd admitted. I just didn't know how much worse. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched her carefully. She said she'd ended things with Ryan, that she'd been professional but clear. She showed me a text she'd supposedly sent him setting boundaries, and I nodded like that was enough. But I started noticing things that didn't add up. Charges on our shared credit card from restaurants I'd never heard of, always on nights she claimed to be working late. Her phone lit up once with a notification, just the letter R, before she swiped it away. She'd come home some evenings with that same distant look, her mind somewhere else entirely. I wanted to confront her again, to demand the full truth, but I was afraid of what I'd find. 3 years don't disappear in one conversation. We'd built a life together, shared lease, shared friends, shared dreams. Walking away meant admitting I'd wasted 3 years on someone who never loved me the way I loved her. So I stayed, telling myself maybe I was paranoid, maybe I was looking for problems that weren't there. But deep down, I knew. I knew she was still lying. I knew that just a kiss was a lie. I knew Ryan was still in the picture. I just didn't have proof. And without proof, I couldn't bring myself to end it. I needed to know the full scope of the betrayal before I could walk away. Not because I thought we could fix it, but because I needed to understand who I'd been living with all this time. And the truth, when it finally came, was so much worse than I'd imagined. Life has a cruel sense of timing. The truth came out not because she confessed, not because I finally confronted her, but because someone else decided I deserved to know. It was a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after our conversation about stopping. I was at my desk at work when an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line simply said, "You deserve to know the truth." My hands were shaking as I opened it. The email was from Ryan's wife. Ryan, the guy Evelyn had been seeing, the coworker she'd connected with, wasn't some single guy exploring anything. He was married with 2 kids. His wife had just found everything. She'd attached screenshots, dozens of them, messages between Ryan and Evelyn, going back almost 5 months, way longer than the few drinks after work story Evelyn had sold me. I sat there reading through them, right in my cubicle, feeling my entire reality reshape itself with each swipe. The messages weren't just flirty or inappropriate. They were detailed planning of meetups, discussions of hotels, complaints about their respective partners. There was my name, mentioned casually, like I was an obstacle, an inconvenience they had to work around. One message from Evelyn, sent just 5 days ago, said she told me they'd only kissed once, followed by a laughing emoji. Another talked about how I was too trusting, too naive, how easy it was to keep the lie going. She joked about how I'd bought the closing the relationship story completely, how I actually believed she'd cut him off. I closed my laptop before I could throw up at my desk. Ryan's wife explained she'd discovered everything when she found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. She'd confronted him, he'd confessed to the affair, and she'd demanded access to his phone and laptop to see the full extent. She found Evelyn's information through his work contacts and decided I had a right to know what was really happening. She said she was filing for divorce, and HR at their company was already investigating because apparently there were policies against this kind of workplace relationship. She ended the email saying she was sorry I had to find out this way, and that some people just don't deserve the trust we give them. I printed everything, every screenshot, every message, every piece of evidence. The timeline alone was damning. Messages from nights she'd claimed to be working late. From afternoons she'd said she was running errands. From the very week we'd agreed to close things and work on us. I put it all in a manila folder and left work early, telling my boss I had a family emergency. In a way, I did. The family I thought I was building was disintegrating in real time. I didn't go home right away. I drove around for hours, just processing. All those nights she'd come home late from work. All those showers immediately after walking in the door. All those face-down phones and private conversations. All those "I love you" she'd said while texting him behind my back. It hadn't been paranoia or insecurity. It had been reality, and I'd been too afraid to see it clearly. That just a kiss had been hotels and lies and an entire secret relationship that continued even after she'd promised to stop. When I finally went back to our apartment that evening, Evelyn was already home, cooking dinner, acting like everything was normal. She smiled when I walked in, asked about my day. I just stood there, looking at her like she was a stranger. Because in many ways, she was. I didn't know this person who could lie so easily, who could betray agreements so casually, who could sleep next to me every night while maintaining an entire secret relationship. I told her we needed to talk. I watched her face shift into that careful, prepared expression I'd seen too many times. We sat at our small kitchen table, the same table where we'd had breakfast 1,000 times, where we'd made plans and shared dreams. I pulled out the folder and placed it in front of her. I didn't say anything. Just waited. She opened it, and I watched the color drain from her face as she flipped through the pages. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at evidence she couldn't deny or explain away. Then she started crying, those big, dramatic tears that once would have broken my heart. She reached for my hand, and I pulled away. She tried to explain, saying it had gotten out of control, she never meant for it to go this far, that Ryan had pursued her, she'd been confused, and she still loved me. She said the messages looked worse than they were, that she'd been venting frustrations but hadn't meant them, that the jokes about me were just her trying to fit in with what he wanted to hear. Then, and this part still amazes me, she started talking about therapy. She said we could go to couples counseling, we could work through this, that relationships go through rough patches and come out stronger. She talked about commitment and growth and all these buzzwords that meant nothing coming from someone who'd been lying to my face for 5 months straight. And then, as if the timing couldn't be more absurd, she started talking about marriage. About how maybe we'd been too casual, how maybe we needed the structure of engagement to truly commit. She talked about starting a family, how having kids would give us purpose and direction. She painted this whole picture of a future together, as if the past 5 months hadn't happened, as if I hadn't just discovered she'd been sleeping with a married man while telling me she loved me every single day. I let her finish. I let her say everything she needed to say. Let her cry and plead and promise. And when she was done, when she finally ran out of words, I said the only thing that mattered. I don't see you as my wife anymore. The silence after those words was absolute. She stared at me like I'd slapped her, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She started to argue, to say that was extreme, that I was being unfair, that one mistake shouldn't define our entire relationship. But I just shook my head. It wasn't one mistake. It was 5 months of deliberate choices. 5 months of calculated lies. 5 months of disrespecting every boundary we'd ever established. It was looking me in the eye every single day while maintaining a relationship with a married man from her workplace, the one place that was supposed to be off limits. It was laughing about my trust with him, calling me naive, treating our relationship like it was a joke she and her affair partner shared. It was promising to stop and then continuing anyway, making me feel crazy for suspecting what was actually happening. That's not a mistake. That's a character revelation. I told her I was moving out, that I'd stay with my brother while I found a new place. She begged me to reconsider, to at least give her a chance to prove she could change. But I was done. I'd already given her too many chances, compromised too many of my own values, ignored too many red flags. I'd lost myself trying to keep her, and I needed to find that person again. The next few weeks were mechanical. I packed my stuff while she was at work, taking only what was clearly mine, leaving everything we'd bought together. I changed my number and only communicated through text on a new one I set up specifically for logistics. She tried calling my brother, messaging my friends, even showing up at my work once, but I'd already told everyone I needed space, and they helped me maintain it. Ryan's wife followed through on her complaint to HR. The investigation revealed that their relationship had violated multiple company policies, and both Evelyn and Ryan were let go. Evelyn lost her job, lost her portion of the rent on our apartment when I stopped contributing, and from what I heard through mutual friends, lost most of her social circle when the truth came out. Chloe, the friend who'd encouraged this whole open relationship idea, apparently distanced herself quickly when things got messy. I didn't take any pleasure in Evelyn's consequences. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied watching her life fall apart. I just felt tired. Tired of the lies. Tired of the drama. Tired of trying to hold together something that had been broken from the moment she'd suggested opening our relationship. Because here's what I understood, too late. She didn't suggest it for us. She suggested it for her. She already had Ryan in mind, maybe had already started something with him and wanted retroactive permission to continue. The open relationship was never about exploration or growth. It was about her wanting to have it all without facing any consequences. And when I agreed, when I compromised my own boundaries out of fear of losing her, I'd already lost. The relationship ended the moment I said yes to something I fundamentally didn't want. Everything after that was just the slow burn of something already dead. 6 months later, I'm in my own apartment, smaller than the one we shared, but entirely mine. I'm rebuilding friendships I'd neglected, pursuing hobbies I'd abandoned, rediscovering who I am outside of that relationship. I don't hate Evelyn. I don't wish bad things for her. I just hope she figures out whatever was broken inside her that made her think that behavior was acceptable. As for me, I learned an expensive lesson about boundaries and self-respect. I learned that love without trust isn't love at all. It's just fear dressed up in romantic language. I learned that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them the first time. I learned that sometimes the person asking you to compromise everything is the same person willing to compromise nothing. She thought she was opening our relationship, but really she closed the door on our future. And the scariest part is that I agreed to it all because I loved her. But love shouldn't mean losing yourself. And I'll never make that mistake again. What would you have done in my situation?